I'm Mike Orwig, and welcome to the Wizard's Chest. With me today is Bob Beale, a longtime friend of mine and an author of The Golden Path to Oneness. And this was Robert's 9-stage journey in oneness. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this subject today is because the new children are aligned for oneness. They're not aligned for the old separation consciousness. And so much of your book talks about your journey out of separation consciousness into oneness. And I thought it would be a good topic for us to play with today and everything. So tell us a little bit on your path and actually just how you got started with it and a little bit of your background, Bob.
Sure, I'd be glad to, Mike. My journey started many years ago. That was somewhat unbeknownst to me at the time, but I went through a variety of interesting experiences and trials and tribulations in life, as we all do in one way or another, and got very interested in about my mid to late 20s on the metaphysical and spiritual aspects of our planetary life. And prior to that, I knew nothing about them. So as time went on, I would read materials and have a variety of experiences with different people that were contributing to my opening. But my purpose was to identify what I call the low self-image. I just felt like I didn't fit in this Earth planetary world. Now, I think there are a lot of us here today that have had that feeling or perspective periodically, if not regularly. So as time went on, a few years ago, I was in bed and in the middle of the night, sound asleep, and was jarred by whether it was a physical shake, which it probably wasn't, but at least some kind of a shake that said, then a voice said, "Robert, get up. We'd like to have you go to your study." And so I said, no, I'm too tired. So I started to go back to sleep. I got shaken again. And they said, "Look, it's only going to last 20 minutes. It'll be okay. Just go in and we want to talk to you." So obviously the third time, I thought, well, I guess there's some seriousness here. Might as well see what's going on. So I went into my study, and that was the beginning of a 9-stage journey. And the stages were outlined to be roughly a month of each in Earth time. And I would get up 3 or 4 nights a week for the middle of the night, usually 1:30-ish in that range, for an hour and a half. And later it was a couple hours even. And so I was instructed to walk on what they call the Golden Path. And so I would walk on the Golden Path and have a series of experiences, which had a lot to do with chakra clearing and chakra opening, consciousness clearing and consciousness opening, if you will. And along this golden path, I would meet various entities that would guide me and instruct me. The chakra opening was a major theme all the way through, and it started with my throat chakra. And then, of course, went to the other chakras as well. But an interesting part of this, between stages 3 and 4, now I'm 3 months into this, I'm walking on the Golden Path, and I see this white furry animal walking beside me. And I thought, wow, this must be a polar bear. I wonder why we have a polar bear here. And the animal spoke up and said, "I'm Henry the tiger. I'm not a polar bear. I'm a white tiger. And I'm going to guide you through this next stage." So Henry was with me all through the 9 stages. And he's a feisty, irreverent, humorous, and at times demanding tiger.
But yet one of the interesting things was he was a multidimensional being.
Very much so.
That had chosen to take on the form of a white dragon. And later in the book, I even remember he mentioned he had several of his friends that had taken on the form of being a blue whale that joined you at about the 5th stage that we're in. And it's an interesting concept that so many people think of just the animal kingdom as being a lower vibration, but nothing could be further from the truth. Now, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be, but in this particular instance, these were some very, very high frequency entities that had taken on, in essence, a totem form of the white tiger with amazing capabilities.
Yeah, very, very true.
And an interesting sense of humor.
Yeah, and he, along the way, said, if I get too caught up in my ego, and the idea is to leave the ego behind and really focus on the spiritual guidance, the inner sense guidance. And he says, if you get too caught up in your ego, I'm going to bite you.
Yeah.
And he did for a period of time. I felt my right lower leg getting more and more raw. And I literally felt that. And then he said, okay, I'm not going to bite you anymore. I think you've got it reasonably well. But if you do get caught up in it, I'm going to bring it to your attention, and you just pat me on the head to acknowledge that you know what I'm saying. So Henry has been a terrific guide all the way through. And even today, after some years of time passed and doing all this, Henry's still around today. And we go to a beach each morning, and there are 3 beautiful whales there that greet us, and Henry, and there's an East Indian masseuse by the name of Bacall, and some others show up too. So
And they still show their down?
Oh yes, they very much so do.
Now, your journey, so many people will start on one particular area. This particular journey, wasn't it something in the range of 9 months, or how long did this?
It was 9 months. Again, each stage was a month in Earth time.
Was it?
So it was 9 months, yeah.
Yeah, that was always an interesting part. The length of time each one of these stages were taking, and they were very, very much like a very intensive workshop.
Very much so.
As you said, 3 times a week or something like that?
3 to 4 nights a week I would get up. And as time went on, it was more frequent. So it would be on the last 4 or 5 stages, it was 4 nights a week, sometimes slightly more, but usually 4 nights a week.
How much of the practices that they worked with you in the dream state and in the meditations do you still actively do in your life today?
Well, that's a good question, and quite a bit. One is, of course, every morning I've been instructed for a long time to meet Henry, the tiger, on a beach. And so I go into a beach in my mind. And as I mentioned, the masseuse, Bacall, East Indian, and the 3 whales and others show up. And so I get guidance for the day, anything that I might be still needing to work on, I'll get that kind of direction from Henry. And so that's one. And there's been shifts that have occurred within me, which is probably the more salient point. And through the 9 months, I could gradually feel myself changing and realizing that this world that we live in today, or we perceive we do, is an illusory world. It's not really the real world. It's not really what ultimately life is all about. So the continuity of life was emphasized strongly. So the key thing I do, though, I keep reading this. I learn something every time I read my book, my own book. But the key thing I do is the morning meditations with Henry and the group.
Now, one of the early things, if I remember right, that you mentioned in your early stages was the letting go of your, what spirit is called for me, your asserted identity. That was a very important piece in letting go of that aspect of ourselves and recognizing, in essence, that you're a light body, not a physical body, and a lot of different thoughts along those lines. You know, we're not our job, we're not our whatever part of our experience that we're here on Earth, and it was a very important aspect, I thought, early on in your thing.
Yeah, very much so. Certainly, I have had a strong identification with my physical body, as pretty much we all do. And I've read in earlier times, material and metaphysical and spiritual material that suggests that we're not our body. But you can understand it intellectually, but to really have the experience of that, which I did in this, and particularly toward the latter stages, where we are really connected in oneness, connected in light, and ultimately what we all are is light. And of course, one of the biggest fears that we have when we're doing something like this, that we're going to let go of this perception of separation, and we're going to just be identicalist. We're going to be, just some kind of a light blob in the middle of a bigger light glow.
Well, either that or the hive mind has been brought up at different times, when there's a fear of losing ourselves in the hive, and that's been brought up.
Oh, yes.
At different times. It's kind of a similar scenario.
But
many of these new kids are all coming in aligned for oneness. What did that actually look like for you in reality through the journey?
Well, oneness is a very gradual building to that experience. And there were animals that appeared. There were a bear that came in from time to time, and some other animals, deers and foxes and so on. And it became clear that we're really all connected, even in the animal kingdom. And it took quite a process for me to really grasp that we don't lose our identity, and that we're all connected but in light. So we all are an individual light as part of a bigger light. And we have a very specific, clear, unique identity within ourselves. So that we not only not lose our identity, we actually gain it. And what I learned anyway, is that, as you've alluded, ultimately we're not physical bodies. And of course, our world here on planet Earth is heavily, heavily bought into the concept of separation, and the concept that we're all individual bodies, and the individual bodies have illnesses and challenges and excitements and so on. It's not to knock planet Earth, because it can be a beautiful place, and there's some very good stuff that occurs here. But we see just look at the nature of politics in our day right now, and you wonder what's going on. So anyway, it was this changed my perspective about who I am, what life is all about, and ultimately who we all are. And one of the things that's emphasized is that this is biblical in a sense, the golden rule. Treat others as we would like to be treated. But taking a step further than that, it's when however we're treating other people that we perceive, that's the way we're treating ourselves as well. And so
what we do to another, truly,
we
are doing to our whole, to the whole that we are part of.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. How do you see this shift from separation consciousness to unity going planetary wide right now?
Well, that's a good question, and not necessarily an easy one to answer. But I see various pods of people, if you will, groups of people who are meditating together. They're studying some metaphysical or spiritual material together, meeting regularly to do that. And so they are becoming connected from a consciousness perspective, and really in that process, learning to support each other, love each other, and be kind and respectful to each other. So we see that. Is it prevalent in our Earth today? No. But what I see is there are pockets of it that are occurring.
These new children, the way I was seeing so much around the quantum children from the last 3-4 decades, have been coming in what I call aligned for unity consciousness. That doesn't mean that in their experiences they couldn't be pulled back based on their society conditioning, parental conditioning, school conditioning, pulled back into some of the old paradigms. But I've always seen that as being like almost like a virus to a computer, that their operating system is to be one with all things. And I know you in the book mentioned quite a bit of like the aggression and war, and how so much of that comes from separation consciousness.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit of just how the fear of the separation triggers so many of the things we see in society today?
Yeah, or the fear of oneness actually triggers that to a degree. Again, as I mentioned, the fear they will lose their identity. But I think your comment on the children coming in, it appears to me, and certainly a lot of others who were attuned to this sort of thing, that there are a number of children with a DNA, if you will, and a spiritual perspective and outlook that's very unique and very much evolved more so than some of us older people when we came in. And life can be challenging for them because they're of the mindset that we are all equal. We all are one in a sense. I'm not sure they would precisely use that language, but just the way they function in life, they know that. At some level of their consciousness, they're very clear that we are all connected. And when they're in environments where they're treated differently from that, and they see people being treated differently from that, I think it makes them very uncomfortable and very unhappy.
No, I mean, that's true. It's in essence, they came into a transition world, but their alignment was for what I would call the new earth, or where we're going, is where their overall alignment's for. And this transition time period is very difficult on them in many ways. Just the level of aggression, the negativity that still exists. And then you have the sensitivity and the toxicity, whether it's emotional, the food, the water, whatever. In order to be more connected in oneness, would you agree that you have to be far more sensitive and compassionate to everything around you, because you're feeling everything at so much more of a greater level?
Very much so. And that triggers the thought, which I think is reflected a bit in here, of acceptance. And it's like we see someone who is quite divergent from what we would like them to be, but we accept them anyway. And we don't judge. And the concept of non-judgment is sprinkled through my book here, but it's when we judge someone else, we're actually judging ourselves. Now that's a tough one to integrate, because it certainly clearly seems what we see with our five senses or experience with our five senses says something different than that. But this is beyond the five senses, and I think these young people coming in today, a number of them are beyond the five senses. Clearly, they have the five senses they have to be in this world. But nevertheless, they have an intuitive sense. They know how to attune to their spiritual mind, and they'll hear spiritual guidance, if you will, in whatever form it may take for them.
Yeah. The empathic nature of these new kids is a very important aspect to unity consciousness. And you mentioned in the book the ability to be compassionate without taking on another's pain, I believe was the way you phrased it. How were you able to do that in your own journey? How did that play out for you, where you were able to become from our generation, which was not necessarily a compassionate generation, very much steeped in many separation paradigms, to being more compassionate without any level of a judgment to anybody you see that thinks differently? And of course, whether it's religious, political, or whatever, there's plenty of people that think differently. How were you able to incorporate that without all of your old conditioning?
Well, that's a really penetrating question, Mike. And some years ago, I've had a number of counselors, psychological, spiritual, and whatever, not religious per se, but I've really gotten into, a long time ago, very interested in the spiritual aspect of our world here, if you will. And what I was told along the way some years ago, that I'm an empath. So an empath picks up the feelings of other people. And I've also been a terrific rescuer. So empaths who are rescuers try to rescue these various people, whether it's to give them money or, whatever. And I paid some severe dues to learn not to do that. And so gradually, though, that shift and transition has occurred. And, I've seen that with other people of a similar nature, too. And of course, we also see people who have the opposite. They're the opposite of an empath. They're really out for themselves. So it's really, are we here to assist and serve other people? Yes, we are. And I think more of these young people coming in are of that perspective in nature. They're less materialistic. They're less trying to get fame and fortune for themselves, but they're here to assist and support others. But at the same time, it's necessary to assist and support yourself. And that's the piece that was semi-missing for me, that took me some tough knocks, if you will, to learn that.
But you mentioned actually in the book that service to others is not about rescuing. And obviously that was a very important part of your path. And I have 3 awesome kids, each with different levels of where they are financially and different things. And I've had to constantly tune in and attempt to see if a particular level of support was really in their best and highest interest, was really supporting their soul growth, or was I enabling them to remain weak? And we've been conditioned as parents in this society to do anything and everything you can to make sure that your offspring have it easier than you did, whether it's the mindset that came out of the Depression. My mother was born in the 30s, or the World War II and all of that, with the shortages that happened with different supplies from the war and everything around that. There was a lot of that focus or conditioning on parenting that was, you'll do everything as a sacrifice so that your children have it easier than you had it.
Yes.
And you make that point that it's service to others. That is not what it's about.
Well, I am of the perception, and per all this experience, that we get set up with perfect experiences to learn whatever it is we need to learn. And that's a big one that you're talking. It was a big one for me. So as referenced in my book, I have a son, his name is Brian, and Brian has some developmental disabilities. Well, a rescuer just does everything for him.
Oh, he was perfect for you, wasn't he?
Oh, he's absolutely perfect. Now, Brian today, he just had his 42nd birthday, is not self-sufficient, but he's got a support system outside of me, and I'm certainly a part of his support system, but I'm not the day-to-day piece of it. Not because I don't like to be or wouldn't want to be, but I realize he needs to stand on his own 2 feet to the extent that he can. And he does it pretty well.
It surprises us as parents
It
sometimes.
really surprises us. It really surprises us. So that rescuer thing has been a big one for me to work through.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, in your book, you went through in depth, obviously, for the whole book with the process, but if you could just kind of step us through the short version and some of the things I saw, like early on, you had the clearing of your field and the incorporation of colors and sound.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
because that's something anybody can do right now.
Very much so. Very much so. It's not unique to me by any means. The clearing of the chakras was pretty much a theme all the way through this. But prior to experiencing this 9-stage journey, as I call it, for about 6 months in my meditations, and I would get up in the middle of the night for these. I was guided to get up in the middle of the night long before this came about, but not nearly with the intensity and the thoroughness of this. And one part of that was that I was introduced to 7 color spheres, which each represented an aspect of me. And I spent a lot of time with that in the middle of the night. The spheres would rotate and so on, and they were integrating a series of, you might say, dimensions or aspect or even skills in me that seemed weird at the time, but as time goes on, those spirits are my friends. They're probably as alive as any of us in some ways. But anyway, that's the color part of it.
You also had, I think, was sound was part of that, wasn't it? Or was that?
Yes. Well, yeah, there's one of the stages did get into sound, particularly music. And one of the offerings is that there is certain music on our planet that we have access to that is healing, that is consciousness opening and of a spiritual dimension. And it's offered that that music came through a number of the prominent composers that we're aware of over centuries of time, but Mozart, Vivaldi, and Beethoven, and so on. And it was offered to me that those people came into their life to do that, to bring that into this world. And so I was encouraged to listen to music, which I did and continue to today, but feel it, not just hear it, but feel it. Get into the feeling of the music, get into the feeling of the color. And on the color part, there was one of the stages I was introduced to a number of different crystal fields, if you will, of various crystals. And those crystals spoke to me, and they had insights and guidance and so on for me to continue in my life. So
you pushed on it just a little bit there. The merging of your consciousness with many different forms is, to me, one of the major openings to oneness that we all can do. Whether it's to connect with a tree out in your backyard. I have an affinity with crystals and the subtle energies of the earth, and I love to connect with a particular crystal or a rock or stone, or even an entire mountain if that feels like something fun. Obviously, you worked a lot with animals throughout the process, but don't you think that kind of practice would also go a long way to move out of the separation consciousness to the oneness, because you can't be separate and make those kind of connections? It's almost like a merging.
Yeah, unquestionably, Mike. Clearly I had experience with a variety of animals, and the sense that I was able to develop over time was that we are one with the animals as much as we are one with the other humans, other people in our environment. And certainly the trees. The trees were even referenced in my process. And go out and hug a tree, or just be by a tree, talk to it, talk to the tree, and be very quiet and listen to what it has to say. And it will probably offer insights and concepts that will be helpful.
Do you ever read Secret Life of Plants?
Some of it, yes, I have it.
Came out in the 60s, but
yes.
One way or another, it was one of the better books that delineates the plant kingdom's consciousness and their ability to scientifically show the communication involved through plant, human, and otherwise, which is fascinating, lovely book.
See, I think that's an incredibly important point. We can actually commune with the trees, with the plants, with the grass, whatever aspect of foliage is about us, but we have to be quiet, and we have to be patient, and we have to trust. And trust is emphasized through this, trust with a capital T. Trust that we're not crazy because we're doing this. What's true is we're crazy if we don't do it. So it's we have a tendency, as has been emphasized to me, to perceive a lot of things backward, and to perceive, per your point, that plants are somehow lesser than us. They're not.
How much did they have you getting out in nature as much as you could, just to sit with the different aspects of not only the earth herself, but the different kingdoms? Did they have you, as part of your exercises, try to readily get out in nature like that?
Well, a qualified yes. In my sessions, in my own inner sense, I went to and visited a lot of aspects of nature. I wasn't necessarily guided physically to go walk on the grass or talk to the trees. I was guided to talk to the trees, go out and do that, and I did some. And you can learn a lot from a wise old tree.
We went, my wife and I went to Sequoia National Park, and you sit with a 2,000-year-old tree.
Oh my! Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's amazing.
But the point in all that, Mike, I think, is our sub-mind or ego mind has a tendency to say that's nonsense, to discount that. The only thing that exists is what we experience with our five senses. And our five senses, essentially, whatever we experience with those, that's what controls us. And what we get to learn as time goes on is that with experiences like this, and this is a unique experience I have, but I don't think it's necessarily unique to me. I think others are having various kinds of experience. You obviously have in your journey, but we're crazy if we don't do this, as opposed to just relying solely on the five senses.
For sure. Another aspect that I noticed that they did quite a bit with you within your clearing was the clearing of blockages. And it was happening on a multi-layer all through your entire energetic body and your physical body. You seem to be very surprised after a period of time that as much was still coming out, whatever it is. But it seemed like for you, I think guilt was a major pattern that they seemed to take an extended amount of time. We certainly know many religions carry a various guilt factor if you don't do their particular dogma exactly. They have their own guilt factors. Where was all of yours coming from? I know you had the military background. They had to clear a lot of the warrior energy out of your field. But how about for you? Where were you seeing the guilt necessarily? Was it more past life-wise or some of it in this lifetime?
Some of both. As I mentioned, I grew up in a family that was very emotionally distant. And I learned to believe that they were distant from me because there was something wrong with me. So I felt guilty that I wasn't an adequate son. And I never really figured out how to be an adequate son. That's a guilt perception that I chose to integrate. But I don't think that was my parents' intention at all, but it was my interpretation. I was a young child and becoming a teenager and so on. So then also from past lives, I think this is a concept that is emphasized in here, and the next book I have even emphasizes it more, which is the stages 10, 11, and 12 of this process, which are different from these first 9. But if one thing that's emphasized pretty extensively in this material and others' teachings too, is that, as I mentioned earlier, this is an illusory world that we live in. But we do have the perception that we have lived innumerable past lives. And so we bring, at least as I understand it and have experienced, we bring that conditioning into this life. Now, you mentioned that the young people coming in, the children coming in today with a more advanced DNA and a more advanced spiritual outlook. Well, I think the people are coming in today, and even in our generation, who are really here to clean up everything. And I don't mean in a way that we did something wrong, but cleaning up beliefs so that we let go of a big one is guilt. I mean, it's a huge one. And one of the perceptions that's pointed out here is the way to get rid of guilt is project it onto somebody else. In the extreme sense, kill them. And of course, we see that particularly in our society today, whether it's on the battlefield or whether it's on the streets in the various cities. So that conditioning is partially in this lifetime and partially and somewhat extensively, I think, from other lifetimes. Now that's a hard one to accept because we can't see those lives or experience them with our five senses. But nevertheless, if we choose to go beyond that, we can start to put the picture of the pattern together and in turn shift and change.
Awesome. So Bob, talk a little bit about the experiencing of oneness from your perspective. And they had 3 more stages that were brought in after this book was completed that will be in the other books.
Yes.
But it is one thing to have the mental understanding of oneness, but yes, it's our job is to move it into the experience of oneness. And let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, in the next book, which is about to come out, which is entitled Experiencing Oneness, there are 3 stages that are noticeably different than this. And stage 10 is about past lives. You suggested the past life thing. Well, past lives that are salient to this life. And it's amazing how many lives I had as a soldier in the military and how distasteful those were to me, going back quite a distance.
So what were you to learn from those if you kept redoing it?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, this is a very good point. I redid it for a purpose. And what I was told, that having had a number of lives as a soldier warrior, that I chose to really fully grasp in my consciousness the absurdity of war. And so I just went to an extreme to experience that, going to West Point and spending being an Army paratrooper and ranger, and my goodness, it's but anyway, it's just like it was so intense purposely, so I would get it, and I got it. You know.
I had a interesting aspect for myself from World War II, and because we love to be judgmental about the different sides. Well, my soul chose lifetimes on both sides, both as an American soldier and as an Austrian man invoked into the German side.
Oh.
So no, I was in essence, experiencing both sides on the soul side. So it's kind of hard to go, point your finger at whatever, but it's always fascinating how the soul energy can make certain selections. But that's another one. Did you come across that in your past lives where they showed you having simultaneous lifetimes going on?
Well, it was emphasized. It was emphasized that we're so bought into the concept of time on this planet, in this third dimensional world or third density world, if you will. We have the beginning, things beginning, going through a process and ending. And it is emphasized in here that there is no time, but it's almost impossible for us to, as a physical person, to really grasp that there is no time. So everything gets sequenced. So the lives that you lived as an Austrian or German soldier and also an American soldier, that's very logical that you could be doing that simultaneously. So you get to integrate those experiences. And what a huge and important lesson for you and discovery for you.
Now, something I've done in my hypnosis work extensively, I've drawn to myself client after client after client that we've seen their off-planet lifetimes. What was shown to you in that regard during the process?
Quite a bit of planet experiences.
Did they, along those lines, it was almost like for me, I don't think anybody's here that has had only lifetimes on Earth. I honestly, and I have no way of proving it, but it's been my experience that I can believe if you went back far enough, you'll find people have had lifetimes on all kinds of different planets and in different forms and different types of existence.
Yeah, it's even suggested in our solar system that people have had lives on Mars and on Venus and on Saturn and perhaps other planets as well. And even going then out of our galaxy, on and on and on.
Yeah, planets we don't know a name for.
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. So, from my experience, that's very accurate. And I did experience going to other dimensions. Another one that's kind of interesting is in stage 5, I believe it was, I went out to sea with Henry and with a guide by the name of Jules, if you will. And we'd go out to sea in this little submarine type device, and then we would dive to the bottom of the ocean. And then we would go into what had to be another dimension. But it looked like we were doing this in Earth, but it was pointed out that this really wasn't Earth. So you could call it inner Earth, or there's another dimension or whatever. So that's one type of experience. And then there were some where Henry and I showed up at obviously some other planet and some other galaxy, which was not given a name in most cases, and some quite more advanced in life than ours.
And I remember you had one on either side, one that was more advanced, that was very pure love, and one that was the opposite extreme, that was the extreme of separation consciousness.
That was very true. One is, it's called the dark planet.
Yeah.
My goodness, none of us.
It was not fun.
It was not fun. It's where people were really had very little conscious awareness, and a lot of homeless people, a lot of just people. The planet was dim, and there wasn't a lot of light, and the
very little hope and
very little hope,
yeah.
no hope actually. So it was not a place that one would want to spend any time.
Do you still practice the multidimensionality that they trained you with?
Well, yes. Henry, from time to time, will take me to some other place, and that doesn't happen frequently now, but occasionally. And
do you do it on your own though?
Yes, occasionally on my own. It's just I feel like my purpose now is to be here and to show up, as Ram Dass said, be here now, and rather than this, I don't really mean what I'm going to say, but rather than walk around with my head in the clouds or other dimensions, you bump into things.
So about the experience in oneness, what else about that? Let's go back to the experience.
Well, the stage 10 is about salient past lives. Stage 11 is a preparation for really experiencing oneness, and it's really Henry and I being together, and he's guiding me through a series of experiences. Then stage 12, Henry and I show up on the Golden Path. We always start out on the Golden Path. And he's very quiet at the onset. He says, well, I'm going to tell you now. And they always refer to me as Robert. I go by Bob, but they call me Robert. And Henry says, you're on your own in this one. You're going solo. And this is where you're literally going to experience oneness. And so we go through a series of preparatory stages, and then that does occur. And the experience of oneness is that we are all lights, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we're a vivid, very conscious, aware, loving light. Now, it's very hard for us to perceive that we could exist without a body, but that is, in the true experience of oneness, we do. And so there's the large global or glowing light the grand light, as I think it's called, is that we're all connected to that, and in turn, we're all connected to each other. So there's really quite a webbing of light sense, all of us being connected, and it just feels wonderful. It's just, there's no fear, there's no guilt, there's no discernment, or there's no upset. It's just, we just all there to love. And so what we learn is, at least from that I did, is what it's light is love and love is light. Now, this isn't the light that we know on this planet. It's a much brighter and more intense light. And it was pointed out that, we asked the question, well, why don't we just go from where we are now to that and be done with it and move on? And I think in an earlier discussion you and I had, it would just, we're just too emotionally and psychologically conditioned in beliefs otherwise, so it would just blow our circuits. We couldn't handle it, so we do it a step at a time.
Yeah, we've been on this continuous journey. We don't think, many of us think on a mental level, oh, the shift is going on right now. But no, this shift has been going on for a very long period of time. And you had asked the question of one of the guides in the book, well, why don't we just clear everything and be done with it at one fell swoop? But that level of light energy coming into the body without it being conditioned would just blow the circuits. And so, no, it's a much more of a gradual process. And regardless of how fast we want it, it's because I've had that conversation with Spirit before too, is why can't this shift be here now? Why can't we go faster? And they go, patience. Patience.
Well, patience is the operative concept here, I think, Mike. And, doing this for 9 months and then an additional 3 months, that took a fair amount of patience. Then earlier things that you've done, I've done, and many have done as far as your own, spiritual and metaphysical exploration has taken a lot of time. And for us, it didn't start in this lifetime.
What's the continuum?
It's a continuum of, but now we're at a point in our evolution where we're really ready to put this out on the table, if you will, and really deal with it. And
I see things going very much exponential. Now, when you, in your meditations or in your light body, and you're looking back at the earth today, do you see the level of light? I've heard it described as so much brighter than it had been, shall we say, back in the 1950s after World War II and everything else. That we regardless of what we see in the media, we have come a long, long way now versus where we were even 60, 70 years ago. Do you see that in your meditations?
Yes, very much so. And clearly, we have a communication network that gets all this out there, if you will, much more so than when you and I were children. And so that's one aspect of it. Another is there are a lot of people per the negative stuff going on, which that seems to have been stepped up as well. So it's like, it's not a battle, but it's like, the light is really letting in a sense, the negative dimension, the dark, burn itself out.
And you think that's how it's playing? Because I know we've often had the phrase of the media, if it bleeds, it leads. It's like everything they're doing is in the media is designed to create an emotional trauma response.
Of course.
Instead of, and it's not that different media sources haven't tried to do a positive spiel. They have. People wouldn't watch it. And that's drives you crazy sometimes.
There have been good news newspapers and good news radio programs or whatever. And you're right, they don't want to hear about the Catholic priest who does absolutely wonderful things and have been very helpful to many parishioners and so on. We want to hear about the pedophiles and the, whatevers.
And then what you focus on expands.
That's
on
right.
a quantum level.
That's right.
There's that.
I think we're on the point that you're making, which is a very good one. We're in a period of evolution, if you will, where we're learning to not judge and not get caught up in the negative media, the negative stuff that goes on, and to really see and feel the beauty, the light, the love that is here. And you always have a choice. And clearly, there are people and there are groups, and whether it's our government at times and media at times, and certain religions that really emphasize in part what's not working.
Yeah, they do all the time. Well, listen, we're going to have to talk some more, Bob, definitely. Thank you. And let me know as soon as this other book comes out. That'll be wonderful to see. But on behalf of the Wizard's Chest, thank you very much.